All right, I'm Joe Mahan, and I would like to welcome you on this beautiful sunny afternoon to Woodlands, the North Georgia estate of Barnsley, of Godfrey Barnsley of Savannah. It's a very happy occasion, really, for me, because the garden is once again taking shape. The great house, the ruins of the great house which you see behind me, are being stabilized, and generally Woodland is being awakened after almost a century of what I call sort of at least slumbering, if not dead. I'm looking at the fountain in the middle of the parterre, which is the formal part of the garden east of the main house. It, as you can very well see, consisted of English boxwood bordering walks and flower beds. Most of the box are here, and they have survived since the time they were planted around 1850. The garden is, of course, typical of gardens that were on formal estates of that period, in that parterres were the fashionable thing to have. But a story I've been told is that Barnsley himself designed and worked out the design based on a Marseille quilt pattern that he had seen. Anyway, it's a long oval, I believe 220 feet long and 120 feet wide. There are some heart designs in it and other elements that bespeak of a romantic character, because after all, he was planting it in memory of his dead wife, Julia, whom on later occasions, Godfrey Barnsley being a spiritualist, as was common in his particular social group in the mid-19th century, he strongly believed that Julia's spirit walked frequently in this garden and that she would enjoy the beauty that he was creating here. When I first saw it in the spring of 1939, I stood on the granite steps immediately behind me and talked with Adairsville Sailor, who was the granddaughter of Godfrey Barnsley. I was then a senior in the high school class at Cassville nearby, and we had a history project by which we raised funds to take a class trip to Washington. And showing the gardens here on the stereopticon slides of that period was a part of that project. And Mrs. Saylor was very interested in it and very willing for us to help. So she told a great many rather interesting things on the 2 or 3 trips that we made here to make those photographs. One was, of course, that the garden had been something that they had felt, as long as it was alive, that there was some chance of Barnsley itself once again being revived. And that particular day, I remember she had 2 laborers out here tending roses and perennials, annuals probably, zinnias and other things that were colorful. And she pointed out some exotic trees that were in here, one of which, of course, was something of a mystery and a fascination to high school students. It was called an Italian smoke tree. And on certain times, and it was approaching that time, the blooms, if you stand and have enough imagination, it's very sort of billowy and fuzzy and looks like smoke. And I believe there were at least 2 of these, and one in the middle of each of 2 beds behind here. She also talked about the tree of heaven, or the heavenly trees, that were part of the plan, and they stood off to my right, just at the edge of the garden. And I was a little amused by this because I realized what a common tree and what a sort of nuisance the so-called trees of heaven, or heavenly trees, had become here in North Georgia. And I wondered if Barnsley was actually guilty of being the one who introduced them. They smell abominably, and they grow prolifically, usually where you don't want them, and the roots are rather hard to get rid of. But I have a feeling that the present management here has gotten rid of the Tree of Heaven already. So let me speak one word to the effect that it was one of the original plantings. Now I'm going to tell you some stories about this place. I have come back rather regularly on a number of occasions since 1939, and some of these were rather happy and some were not so happy, and mostly it's been with a continued feeling of a regret that deterioration had continued, and you could sort of mark from year to year the deterioration that went on with buildings, the areas that were no longer cleaned out, and the growth of undesirable trees, which are native trees, which in turn killed off certain of the others. And one very fine tree in 1939 that is no longer here was one of the sequoias, and the only sequoia I have ever seen growing anywhere in this area, the famous California redwood. It stood right back of the main house for me in part of the court that we will probably see later. And the very large stump of it is there now, but I understand lightning and wind and various elements, natural elements, persisted until the tree was destroyed. I think I'll do it sort of chronologically, as I think that things occurred out here, and put in some incidental stories along the way. I may or may not tell you where they came from. And since I have been accused of being something of a good storyteller and have received most of these from people who were good storytellers, I cannot absolutely vouch for the historical accuracy of all of them. People like Mr. Bobby McElwee, however, who is the museum director here now and does this kind of tedious research in the 4 or 5 major collections of papers from Godfrey Barnsley and from this family that are located in places like Duke University and Durham, North Carolina, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the University of Georgia in Athens, Emory University in Atlanta, and several other places. Nonetheless, it is certain that Barnsley came this way with a group of friends from Savannah in 1838, exploring the region from which the Cherokees were that same year forced to migrate to Oklahoma. And he went as far as Chattanooga, which was the point then called Ross's Landing on the Tennessee River, to which the state of Georgia was to build a railroad financed by the state from a stake driven in the ground they called terminus of the 2 railroads that were being built, one from Augusta and one from Savannah. And they were to meet at a spot near the Chattahoochee River. And from there, which spot was called terminus, the state was to build, and did build, a road called the Western and Atlantic from that point to Ross's Landing on the Tennessee. Barnsley fell in love, we're told, with the area and commissioned his friend Charles Wallace Howard, who was a Presbyterian minister from Savannah, to purchase land for him in this area on which he hoped to develop an estate. Now, I have understood from several sources that Barnsley himself never owned this property because it was not legal under the Constitution of the state of Georgia till 1868 for foreigners to hold real estate. So it was all bought in the name of his children and of his family. Anyhow, development must have begun in 1838 as well, or soon afterwards, which was the traditional date of the wooden house that was built first and was the balancing wing of the one that's surviving of the main house. And this is where the Barnsley family stayed on occasions when they came, prior to the big house being completed sometime in the 1850s to the point where it was usable. I will have to tell you a little bit about the Savannah of that period and exactly who Godfrey Barnsley was in relation to the city of Savannah. He had come there apparently about 1823 when he was 18 years old from Liverpool, and he had grown up in a small place that is still called Barnsley. outside to the south and west of Liverpool. We are told that he arrived with 2 or 3 shillings, less than $1, in his pockets. He had stowed away on one of the vessels that hauled cotton. In Savannah, he went to work for William Scarborough, who was the first big-time cotton merchant in the city, and was the president in 1819 of something called the Savannah Steamship Lines, which sent the first steamship across the Atlantic Ocean, the steamship Savannah. And this one was not very successful, but it began, of course, the whole business of steam navigation across the oceans. Scarborough had a very impressive company there, and he had a very impressive home called the Verandas, which had been built in 1819 under the direction of the British architect Benjamin Jay, who was one of the best known of the English Regency architects of the period. The house is still standing in Savannah. Anyway, Barnsley himself and his family occupied it until the mid-1840s, when, after the death of his wife Julia, Mrs. Scarborough came here on occasions to stay, and apparently as the house was finished, they brought at least their portion of the furniture from the big house in Savannah to furnish here. In late years, it turns out that these included the 2 clocks that I believe Mr. McElwee mentioned to you earlier. The larger of those 2 clocks, which he said I purchased at the sale, I purchased for a friend, Mr. Stuart Houston, from Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Mr. Houston was an iron and coal magnate in that area, but he was a native of Savannah, and he was desirous of acquiring as much as he could of the pieces from here that had gone from Savannah and to be returned to the Telfair Academy in Savannah. That particular clock, according to the family stories and according to research that more or less verified it by the friends in Savannah, was purchased during the French Revolution, probably in 1793, during the height of the Reign of Terror, from a French peasant who was pushing it down the street in a push cart. William Scarborough was there that year. He did tour around in Paris. He did see part of the Revolution. And this is a perfect fit of some of the furnishings that very likely came from the Tuileries. This was what Scarborough himself had believed. Anyway, that clock is still somewhere in Savannah, but it was hung here in the main parlor. There was just a persistent legend and sort of common knowledge among the Barnsley family in the late 19th century that the author Augusta Jane Evans Wilson had visited here in the fall of 1865 for about 2 weeks, during which time she had begun a new novel. And the novel was apparently St. Elmo, which appeared in the mid-year 1866 and was an instant success and became the most popular of the Victorian novels. There is a very vivid description generally of the house without being specific, but she tells about its grandeur and about, you get the general feeling of it. She tells about the serpentine walks in the garden and the fountain and other things that are in that highly romanticized Victorian novel. We now know, or at least I do, from 2 or 3 very good sources, that that is exactly what happened. I did see, and I'm not sure where it is now, but it is still in existence, a visitor's register with the dates of 1866 in there, and Augusta Jane Evans, who had not yet married Mr. Wilson, had signed the guest register. I also saw during our visit here in 1939, and I'm sure afterwards, a letter which Mrs. Saylor had in her possession, dated in 1907, and she had written the now elderly Mrs. Wilson to ask her point blank, did she use this Woodlands as the setting for her novel. And she had apparently asked Ms. Wilson, did she remember her, Addie Balzell's mother, Julia. And the letter began, "My dear Adelaide, of course I remember your sweet mother, Julia." She went on to inquire about the family. Then she said, well, now this question has come up before, and I want to repeat again that even though I was influenced by the setting, and I did use the Woodlands to that effect, all underscored the characters originated in my own mind. Then Mrs. Saylor told me that her mother had said there was considerable dissension and ill feeling of particularly Uncle George, the elder member of the family, because he felt that the character St. Elmo was based on his less admirable traits, and that there was much more realism in the family than they liked. It wasn't proper for a lady to come visit and then write a novel about the place for one thing, but the family for another. Be that as it may, on that ground, I have no hesitancy at all in saying that this is the location for the novel St. Elmo, if you ever get around to reading it. It's a very dramatic Victorian novel. 13 people, I believe, die in the first chapter. It begins in what is now St. Elmo, the suburb of Chattanooga, by that name, where little Edna Earl was being reared by her grandfather, the blacksmith. He died, and she had nothing to do, nowhere to turn except to go to Columbus to work in the cotton mills, which was evidently the worst fate that could possibly befall her. But on the way, fortunately, there was a train wreck, and she was thrown from the train and injured, and this sweet lady in a very elaborate carriage came by and took the wounded girl to this place, and the story went on from that. So that's all I know, but I insist that it is the setting for St. Elmo.
You know, I love beautiful things, old things, things that are a history within themselves. And certainly I want to appreciate Dr. Joseph Mahan for inviting us and bringing us to this place, and certainly the curator, that I'm sure that many of you will want to meet yourself. In this garden, you know, Barnsley was a spiritualist in a way, and after his wife of many years had passed away, I'm sure he spent much time here in this garden, probably doing much as I'm doing now, reminiscing, meditating, and thinking upon years gone by, things she had said to him. And a spiritual person is a person that has much feeling. You know, I look at paths, and I wonder who walked here or what this might say, if it could speak. And I'm sure that we have a man, perhaps something along that line. And what a beautiful garden. What could be wrong, certainly, anything wrong with a person that loved beauty and to create beauty such as this? No, I'm sure that his mind and the closeness and the love for his lady brought back many memories as he reminisced and planned these gardens. You know, I think it's something that you'll really enjoy. The beauty of the fountains, the pure rawness of probably when he first came here, the rawness of the woodlands of Georgia, back even before the Civil War. And you know, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the Union Army as it comes down across this setting and basically takes over for that time when that great conflict between this nation took place. No, it's good to visit a place like this occasionally. It's kind of the roots of this nation, where a man from Europe would come here, would set in his roots, and would build these gardens for his lady and the heritage onto his children. And as all things are, I noticed a picture of his granddaughter that was the last living relative here. Following the Civil War, I could see the sadness upon her face as no doubt the depression and many other things had taken place. And yet, to see it spring back to life, as it has here and as you can well witness, it lets us know and it gives us hope that things of beauty are forever. And even the family motto that concerns a rose, that life is as the rose. You know, the rose sheds her flower, and the next year she springs back. I hope that many of you will be able to enjoy the beauty of this old rose that sits on top of this hill, this beautiful old structure, and the pride that evidently went into it. And hope that you can walk this path and feel these years gone by. How wonderful it is that we have people that take an interest, like Dr. Mahan, and Bobby, I'm going to call him the curator here, which I know you'll enjoy. Yeah, it does you real good when people believe in preserving things. I just consider it a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you for being here also via this documentary.
All right, I am standing on the granite steps, as you can see, in front of the main house at Woodlands. And this is a spot that I think has a great deal of very interesting history associated with it. As you can see, the main driveway comes to this point around both sides of the garden and had entered from the main road out to the northeast of here. This is the route along which the family told James McPherson during the time that he was here on parts of 3 days in May 1864 and had used the house to the right as his headquarters. As they went to leave on the morning, I guess, of the 19th of May, 1864, he had various units of his troops parade through the garden to see the gardens and the 100 varieties of roses they said were blooming at that time. And the general and his staff stood on these steps, and Mr. Barnsley himself, who had not received the visitors other than to inform them that he was a British subject. And I suspect this had something to do with the appreciation that they suddenly developed for taking care of the gardens. The steps here and the sills for the windows and certain other trim work on the main house is of Vermont granite. This was before the time that granite was being quarried in Georgia. It was apparently brought here by way of the Western and Atlantic Railroad, probably after 1849 when it was completed through to Chattanooga. Anyway, an old black man who had been one of the Barnsley's few slaves and who lived here long afterwards, delighted to tell people about the fact that he was in charge of hauling the granite pieces from the railroad over at Hall Station to here in wagons. And it was a considerable undertaking. These are very large pieces of granite, and they must have been quite heavy. But as you can see, they have stood up very well. They will be a while before your visitors wear them away. The two triangular rock piles were really rock gardens, very early ones, triangular shaped to fill in the pattern here of the drives. Now, I have heard the story that here are where the two pieces of statuary were supposed to go, that were, of course, to be points of interest in the garden and to match or sort of counterbalance the fountain out in the middle. We're told that in 1864, when the Union Army came upon this place as they moved south from Adairsville, headed generally toward the Etowah River, the statues had not been put into place, but were still in crates in what is now the scullery, or the wine cellar, or part down there. The final work of finishing the house was being overseen by a French interior decorator who panicked when the news reached them that the Union Army was approaching. So he ran away to join the winning forces. You know, this is what often happens, you know. Okay, I might have done the same myself. They seemed to be the safest place to be. Nonetheless, he spread the story about the rich old Englishman for whom he was working over here, and the fact that he had personally seen 2 crates of gold hidden in his cellar. So when McPherson slept upstairs in the wing over there, some of his army broke into the lower floor underneath him and drank, according to a later inventory, $18,500 worth of wines, liqueurs, and whiskeys of sorts and kinds. Then they took out the big crates, expecting them to contain the old man's gold. And when they found they were simply statues, they broke them into pieces and left them lying in the driveway at the back of the house. This is a little bit of history that doesn't make any difference, except that I was also told on another occasion by Mrs. Saylor, whom I happened to think to ask, well, Ms. Saylor, what happened to the pieces of the statues? Are they around anywhere? Then she said Moses, this same man that she often quoted, said they hauled them to the easiest place they could get to down there, a washout that had occurred in the creek bank, and dumped them in there. So I expect one day somebody will stumble upon them down there, and maybe they can be restored and put back into their places. Behind me then is the main entrance to the big house. Above is the square tower, which is characteristic of Tuscan villas. I happened to once on occasions, after I was familiar with this place, to ride by train from Rome up to Florence, right through Tuscany. And I was very conscious, of course, of expecting to see Tuscan villas, and I looked out the window on both sides. And to my great delight, I did see at least 3 of the original ones sitting in fairly good setting. And Mr. Barnsley, as I might say, equals them. So it was certainly one of the very first examples in America of a style that in the next 20 years became very popular and finally modified into what we generally call Victorian.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to Barnsley Gardens at Woodlands. I'm Bobby McAwee, the museum director. I'm going to tell you a little story here about Colonel Earl of 2nd Alabama Cavalry. Colonel Earl was a friend of the Barnsley family prior to the Civil War. When the Federal troops got as far south as Adairsville and headed in this direction, Colonel Earl rode to warn Godfrey Barnsley, and he and Godfrey gathered the women and children, putting them in the basement of the kitchen wing. As he prepared to leave, he went out the south side door, and just as he stepped outside, Mary Quinn, Godfrey's Irish housekeeper, hearing the advancing Federal troops and seeing them shoot up in this direction, opened the basement door with her little Irish curiosity getting the better of her. Colonel Earl heard her and stepped to the corner of the building, suggesting, "Mary, get back, you're going to get..." Those were his last words. We have this documented by the gentleman who killed him, who was a sharpshooter from Illinois. He kept notes throughout the war, and after the war wrote a book documented where he had killed Colonel Earl at Woodlands, May 18, 1864. Also, Godfrey Barnsley wrote a letter describing it. Now, when the colonel was first killed, there was nothing Godfrey could do for him, and during the time that he lay out back here, 2 skirmishes took place out front. After the skirmishes were over, and after General McPherson and his 18,000-man army occupied Woodlands, Godfrey was allowed to bury the colonel in the spot where I now stand, and this is his tombstone just behind me. He was not allowed to take him over to the family graveyard and place him there. Now, when he was searched, the material that was removed from him contained 2 pictures, one of which was his wife, the other was, strangely, of Mary Quinn, the Irish housekeeper. Joe Mahan has seen the papers that came from there, and I also They are currently in a historical file in Atlanta. While we're in this spot, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to point out one of the rare foliage that Godfrey brought here. This dead tree that you see over behind me is the remnants of a sequoia tree, a redwood from California. Lightning struck it and killed it approximately 10 years ago. Standing on the hill here, we're overlooking, to the left is Rhododendron Hill. The gardens crew has reintroduced in excess of 500 rhododendrons to the hill. The south slope here, this spring, opened up with 41,000 daffodils. Next spring, I understand there will be nearly twice that number. The water feature, which you see, the first one down below us here, Godfrey called his bog gardens. Commonly, we would refer to it as a sunken gardens. He talked of thousands of aquatic plants that he had introduced to his bog gardens. They apparently were quite tight if he had thousands in that small area. Beyond that, where you see the water sprinkler currently going, that was his British Deer Park. Beyond the British Deer Park, which you cannot see from this location, is his Oriental Gardens, which we have several letters where people visited here and wrote describing the beautiful Oriental pond surrounded by giant Chinese fir. The pond to the west of that, to our right, is the Black Swan Pond. Black swans will once again be swimming on that within the week. The current owner of the property is Prince Hubertus Fugger of Bavaria. As soon as Prince Fugger was made aware of the historical significance of Barnsley Gardens at Woodlands, he chose to restore the gardens and stabilize the ruins. This is his gift to the American people. To me, this is highly significant when you consider the Fugger family has been making history for between 600 and 700 years in Bavaria. He is, however, a student of the American Civil War. Stonewall Jackson was his childhood hero, hence the name of our company, Stonewall Limited Partnership.
Good afternoon, and I'm Robert Norton, and this is Helen. We welcome you to Valleyview, and we want to have the privilege of a nice visit with you, and we'll go over the house, and you can ask any questions you want, and we'll tell you things we know about it as we go along. So if we'll all get together, I'll tell you a little bit about the place. I want to tell you something about the beginnings of the house. As you know, this is a very interesting area from the standpoint insofar as the Civil War is concerned. And this house was built in about the mid-1840s. And it was built by my great-grandfather, who was a South Carolinian, and he came here about that time and started clearing the place, bringing some people with him for that job. We think it took probably about 5 to 7 years to build the house. But at any event, the family actually moved here in 1850. So they were here for 10 years before the start of the Civil War. The house was built with slave labor, with 2 expert builders in charge, and It was built from the red clay. The brick was baked down in the river valley right in front of the house here, and from the red clay that was taken right from the place, and the mortar was burned from the rocks in the hillsides around. All of the timber was hard pine. Of course, it was cut here on the place, and there was a limitless source of it for that reason. But the principal thing I think that you would be interested in knowing, just from the standpoint of the house and what it was built of and how it was built, would be the Civil War history. And that was interesting from the standpoint that when Sherman was making his path from Chickamauga to Atlanta, at the time that he burned Atlanta, when my great-grandfather saw what was happening, he took his family and his mother's family, who were in a nearby home here, and refugeed to Russell County, Alabama. They left the house in the care of a German cabinet maker whom they brought with them from when they came from South Carolina. And an interesting thing is that a great deal of the furniture that is still in the house was built by this cabinet maker. He made it all of walnut, and of course, being on the river, there was a limitless source of walnut for him to use. And it's also interesting that I inherited this house from the widow of my mother's only brother, and she not only left us the house but everything in it. So a lot of that furniture is still in the house. But he refugeed and left the place in the hands of this German cabinet maker, and he was a rather uncouth old fella, but anyway, he was devoted to the family. And after Sherman burned Atlanta, he withdrew his forces with his headquarters at Kingston, which is, you know, is a nearby little town on the railroad. And General Schofield, one of his divisional commanders, was in this house for about 3 months. And we know that that was about the time, because that was the time that Sherman took to regroup his forces and be ready to move on. And General Schofield had a company from Warsaw, Indiana. We know that because two of the people wrote their names on the wall, left their calling cards, and fortunately we were able to get a roster of that company. One of the things we know is these two soldiers who had written their names were mustered out at the end of the war. They both survived the war. But it's an interesting historical angle. However, the first thing the Yankees did when they came here was pack up everything that they could move and put it on wagons and haul it over to Kingston. It was the usual thing they did with spoils of war to ship it north. And this old boy got on his high horse about it, and he told them, said, "I'm a German citizen, and you've taken my stuff, and I want it back." And he wrote a letter to General Rosecrans, who was on Sherman's staff and himself a German. And he says, "These buzzards have just taken my stuff, and I'm not going to put up with it." He didn't expect to hear anything from it, but in 2 or 3 weeks, here came the wagons holding back over the hill. And as a result, when the war was over and the family moved back, he was able to say, "Well, it's all here."
Well, that's wonderful.
That's sort of the story of the Civil War part of it. There are a few relics around. This is right here in this column is a bullet hole. You can see the exit of it right there below the towel holder. And there's some scars on the wall. This building on the outside there was originally the old kitchen and the sewing room. And apparently they used that wall for sort of target practice, and the scars and mini balls are there. And in the old kitchen we have some of the relics that are interesting as far as the war is concerned. Now, is there any particular thing now that you would like for us to point out? To see, there are a lot of things that show you what the house was like. This well out here was the only source of water, and during my childhood I remember they had the old oaken bucket there with the brass bands on it, and it was before the germ theory, you know, was taken into consideration, and they had a dipper in the bucket, and everybody would drink the water, throw what they didn't drink out, put the bucket back in, and but fundamentally the house is essentially as it was. And I expect now, with that much information, you'd like to see the house. But,
Oh, we would love to, and I must say that the house is really in good repair, and
well,
and
thank you.
It just looks very, very nice, and we just appreciate you allowing us to see through.
Well, we're just delighted. And I want you to remember that so many of the things in the house as we go through it are original pieces of furniture, and you can pick them out without any trouble. My aunt and uncle had a very interesting life. They spent 10 years in the diplomatic corps in Romania during the reign of Queen Marie. She was a very beautiful woman, and her husband was the most dried-up looking little sap you ever saw in your life. But she was one of the granddaughters of Queen Victoria. But at any event, in their travels, they picked up many lovely things. Some of them we have lost, unfortunately, from break-ins. So before we found out, we had to put bars on the doors and the windows. But so many things, rather beautiful things that they acquired, and so they are other things that make the house interesting.
Well, we're anxious to see it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good. This room was the living room. This is a picture of my Uncle Sprout Fouché. I don't know whether that light's good enough to see it. It was from his widow that I inherited Valleyview. He was one of the most charming men that I ever knew in my life. When I was a little boy, it was more fun to go around with him. He had a sense of humor that wouldn't wait, and anything he wouldn't tell you. All right, one of the things I would like to tell you, and you might be interested in knowing that, is the woodwork is painted all with the original paint. And most of it is in very good condition. As you can see here in these doors, interesting. You might be interested in seeing, this is a plaster panel here. We had that original paint, but we haven't done anything about it. But if you'd like to compare that to a place that it was protected, there's a place in the hall that gives you a pretty good idea. See, this is what it originally looked like, and this sofa's been there for generations. Yeah. I thought you might be interested in the comparison.
That looked like mahogany, wasn't it? Inset mahogany, perhaps.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is some work of my great-grandmother's when she was 16 years old. I don't think you can get a picture of that. Well, let's come into the parlor here, and we'll
then it's the alphabet. And then here it says, praise to God in moral praise for the love that crowns our days. That is beautiful.
1835 there.
1835, October the 15th, 1835.
I want to tell you about this portrait. And this is the parlor. And this is the room that the Yankees used for a stable. They had their horses, mostly the officers had horses, and they had them tethered out in the yard, and the Confederate sharpshooters were packing them off, so they brought them in here. And this was great-grandmother's piano, and they ripped the keys out of it and used it for a horse trough. It's one of the interesting things about this room. Another interesting thing is the story of this portrait. This is a portrait of James Rowell's mother. Yes, and she had a little house near here, which is a beautiful little house, sweet as it can be, called Rose Cottage. But in any event, this portrait was painted by an itinerant artist, and he was living in Baltimore. She had a big family, and everybody was clamoring over the portrait, and they were having a family feud about who was going to get it. And she said, "Just calm down, and we'll get this guy to come back here, and I'll sit for it, and each one of you can have one." Well, they wrote to him, and he told him. He said, "The problem is that I'd be glad to do it, but my business is so good here I can't get away. But if you'll send that portrait up, I'll copy it for you." So that's what they did. And it worked out very well. He copied it 5 times and sent the 6 of them back here and never told them which was the original.
So it must be the guy.
So they were still fussing over it. This is my grandmother, and this is her book of memories of her childhood during the war. And this is a picture of her mother. Well, the interesting thing about this picture is that she's knitting a bedspread, and she knitted one for each of her 5 granddaughters. And we have 3 of them in the house now, and I was just telling the girls that they can look at them, but if they touch them, their name is mud. Because we can't, they're so fragile now, we can't launder them. But in any event, she's sitting in one of these chairs here, as you can see. And it was all very simple in design. And however, the upstairs bed's a little more tedious to build. But there's a similar piece of this in the dining room.
If we can, I'm going to let Mike go up and take a picture of you coming up the stairs.
All right, I may not make it this time.
You could put it in slow motion for that. We need one run up those steps anymore.
And if you want to explain that piece right there in the corner when you get to the
Yeah.
top, just go right ahead. And
He doesn't
All right.
even know what it is.
I don't know what's that thing called.
Name
No, it's got a name that ends in the corner. I tell you, now, I want you to know I don't know what the hell the thing's called. But at any event, it's one of the original pieces here, and it's an interesting piece.
What nice is closed, Joe, but that is not it altogether. Now, anybody who doesn't know that is doesn't get to us.
that's right. I wouldn't think so.
We were taking some friends up one time, and this young man, who was one of our daughters' age, was
One of the things we are doing is we are weaning the calves.
I told them when we walked up, I said, somebody's weaning calves.
That's exactly what the trouble is.
sorry for the cows. I just don't know what to do.
I know.
It's terrible.
It's part of life, and
Yeah, but fellas don't have to sit down there and cry and hurt like that.
True.
It's not
There-
really
it-
just part of life.
There's that part of life is not as fair as it could
No,
be.
part of anything.
Now there's an interesting thing about this balcony. These metal posts were originally the only support for it, and there was an iron grill work that had been cast at Cooper's Iron Works. And when Sherman came through, they destroyed the ironworks and the castings. And of course, after the Civil War, everybody was broke. And they never, during my childhood, there was never anything but this shelf up here. And I want you to know it would scare the pants off of you to get out of here. But this is one of the areas that we had to repair, and this is the original flooring. And all of this boxwood is originally from South Carolina, and the triple hedge is also the same. Was also brought with them when they came, but the boxwood maize was from cuttings that they had, little plants that my great grandmother brought. Now these
That's a fainting couch.
That's a what?
Fainting couch.
Oh.
For when they wore those corsets.
Corsets too tight, you couldn't breathe very good.
now there's some interesting things in
Get
here.
back here. Get some light.
Now this is one of the bedspreads. I think this is the prettiest one, and of course this is Mr. White is doing. I don't know. Can you imagine turning that on a hand lathe?
This little couch bed is a handmade bed, but we're not sure that Mr. Whitey made it. It's a little more to do it than any of the other things that we know or pieces that he made. But we had that reworked, and the fellow said it was dead made that it's got enough discrepancies here tonight to let you know.
Well, now all of you doubting Thomases, I want you to gather around.
I'm not one, so I don't have to gather. You all go gather. You all will be doubting.
You people who don't believe the Yankees were here. I don't know whether you can get a picture of that or not. It's not as clear as it was because as a child I ran my hand over it every time I came up here. But that top name there is Newton Westfall. It is Company C of the 4th Indiana Cavalry, September the 7th, 62, 64. It had to be 64. And man below is Michael McNulty.
Well, they
Did
just
you
kind of
get a good look at it?
Yeah, that's neat.
Did they just kind of would make themselves at home then?
Absolutely.
When they moved into an
Yeah,
area.
yeah.
It's you know, disciplined troops do not destroy usually unless they're ordered to.
Yeah.
Now this other room is pretty much the same. This you can see is one of Mr. Whitey's pieces. Yeah, then show them how that thing lets down. That's
Back then, he had the idea of
ingenious.
The side deck and stuff. That at the time I was raising my young'uns, I thought it was fairly new invention.
Well, that little baby bed is just
Isn't
Yeah.
that precious?
that is something.
That's a sweet thing, isn't it?
It is. Well, I can certainly feel the love and family pride and heritage
Yes.
that's involved
Yeah,
in
well,
this home. And I'm
how
going
fortunate we were. God's
Yes,
always,
and
they
I'm
just
gonna-
dropped in our laps, you know.
to be praying that that some of y'all's young folks.
Oh, all of my children love this place.
Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm just going to come. Oh my.
Now this piano was out on the porch, and it was the piano that the young folks used when they had the parties and so forth and so on.
This was built the same way.
I think one of the interesting things is the actual cotton to work on those was really beautiful way. And on the other side, you see, it was the same thing. And I was just telling them that the slaves brought the food in from the kitchen, which was outside, and served it from here.
And this was the smokehouse.
That was the smokehouse, and the floor of it is dug down about that far. And you know, salt was one of the things that was a source of
Curing meat.
yeah. And in the wall, they dug that up and got salt out of it.
Well,
So they'd still have something to cure the meat.
well. And then I can remember the WPA and the CCCs when all that came
Oh,
in.
yeah.
You know, of course, I was too little to participate
Yeah,
in it.
well, you know, Aunt Edith, really her sole income was from the soil bank.
Well,
You remember the soil
yes.
bank?
Oh, yes.
And she got, I think, $3,300 a year from it, but that was her sole income, and she couldn't have survived here if it hadn't been for that, because all of us were broke.
Yeah, yes.
By the time she died, I was pretty well established, but I wasn't practicing in the days when the doctors had got to be millionaires, you know, and that sort of thing. I'm sort of glad I didn't.
Well, I'll tell you, I must compliment you all on this place. I've fallen in love with it. It's just beautiful.
Well, we have been interested in it, and particularly since I retired, I've enjoyed doing things with it.
Yes.